Thank you all for coming. Many thanks to those of you who are suffering in the sun. Soon the shade of Asa Gray's Copper Beech will shade you gently, so I promise to speak long enough for that to happen. Now, every endeavor like this that spans so many years is a collaborative effort. And we are very lucky here today to have Richard Rabinowitz, who's going to come up and say a few words, because it is he and Linda Kaplan, both of the American History Workshop, who pioneered the story of Northern slavery, and particularly in New York, with the two great shows at the New York Historical Society. And so Richard's going to set the context for just a minute, and then I'll come back on stage and tell you about the book.
I'm thrilled to be here with you today. This is a great day of convergence. This is the convergence of a book that has been growing for 20 years and has brought so many people and so much knowledge and so much wisdom together. It's also, of course, a celebration. This is a site-specific book, and this is a great site of convergence because all of you are sitting and standing on one of the most important historic places in North America. Because here, just right on our ground, Africans and Europeans and American Indian people came together and really began to work together to create an American civilization, an American society. This is one of the very first times that this happens. And it's happening right here. And under this ground, the archaeological investigation has shown evidences of the way these three cultures came together. So it's a very exciting thing to be welcoming Mac's book back to this site. And she, of all the historians and scholars that I've worked with over many years, has such a profound sense of site and of place. As you've heard, she has gathered material for this from archives on four continents and has brought together an extraordinary kind of learning. But the thing that makes her unique is her ability to see and to capture in her through her eyes a kind of sense of how landscapes work. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to share with you the convergence of this book and this site. Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much. That's great praise. Now, he used the operative word see, and towards the end of my talk today, I want you to see 5 of the people who walked here. I want them to rise up out of the ground or row their way across this inlet. So after I finish talking and when you've bought your book, I want you to walk around and have those shades go with you because they are here. That's why I call this talk Visible, Invisible. It's the only place I can do this talk. Can you all hear me? Good. So, at Sylvester Manor on Shelter Island in New York, what's visible? A serene 18th century house in its landscape, whose owners played honorable roles in the Revolutionary War and in the Civil War. They built this fine house. Can you still hear me? Am I doing all right? They built this fine house, only the second one on the site. It's a rambling, comfortable dwelling now that was extended northward in the late 18th century and in the 19th century from the original elegant Georgian house, Newport style, which is the center block with the hip roof and the 2 big chimneys. The piazzas were added in 1908, as was this little portico over the front door. So, what do we know about what we see? The Sylvesters raised their children, whose 11th generation inherited the property in 2006. They husbanded their crops in the fields that still belong to this place, 243 acres. They poured tallow candles. They planted gardens, and they planted and cut down trees. One of them corresponded with Thomas Jefferson about the Hessian fly, a common wheat pest. They wound the great English grandfather clock that still stands in the hall. It chimed and kept time for them through the years. They embroidered bed hangings. They churned butter, which they sold as far as Newport, Rhode Island, and even down to Barbados. Imagine eating butter that had made a 6-week trip. They spun flax and wove cloth, and they wrote down their own thrifty Yankee recipe for shoe polish. All the details of colonial life that we've come to appreciate as American. And as the centuries passed, they invested wisely in new American ventures. The Erie Canal, in railroads, and guano mines off the coast of South America. They toasted each other from a silver tankard, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was purchased with the money made from their successful economic adventures. Now, what's invisible is equally a part of our national history. Sylvester Manor is a cradle of the system of slavery, as Richard said, that became a national system throughout New England as throughout the South, as far west as Texas. In 1680, Nathaniel Sylvester, an Englishman brought up in Amsterdam, and his English wife Griswold counted 24 people as their property, the largest number in the North at the time, 11 men and women and 13 children. Many had African names. Others had Creole names, such as Jaquero, which tells you that they had come through other places besides Africa. They'd been transported to the West Indies or to Brazil. Jaquero could be a name of French origins, Jacques. The O ending tells you it probably has some Hispanic other connotation. Conjure with it as you like. That's Jaquero. The slaves' labor produced the first pad of wealth for the Sylvesters from the West Indies sugar trade. On Shelter Island, they tended hogs and cattle to butcher for salt meat. They bred and broke horses to power the sugar mills and cut trees to shape barrel staves to make casks, which were really the shopping bags of the day. You couldn't do anything with sugar unless you had a barrel to put it in. You couldn't do anything with rum unless you had a barrel to put it in. You couldn't do anything with molasses unless you had a barrel to put it in. The staves that were cut here were shook down, which means that they were separated into all their many parts, tied, shipped aboard out of this tiny harbor off to a bigger harbor at Deering Head, where there's 47 feet of water and where the big ships lay off to be loaded with all the provisions to go down to the West Indies and to come back with all the sugar products and with the slaves who landed probably at that site at the water landing right there. Go down and take a look. Is that mine? Oh, good. Okay. Doesn't matter. So sugar, molasses, and rum came back to the manor, to New England, and was also shipped to Europe. Sylvester Manor was an experiment in early global capitalism, and it was a successful one. The first Sylvesters, who bought the entire 8,000-acre island as a business proposition, not as a home, had credit in the markets of Amsterdam and London. Governor John Winthrop, Jr. of Connecticut borrowed 400 pounds sterling from Nathaniel's brother Giles, who lived in London, in 1661, when Winthrop ran short of cash in London. He was waiting for the royal patent that would give him his colony of Connecticut. What to us comes as a shock, as it did to me when I first realized it in the quiet of the Friends Library in London, the Society of Friends, was the Sylvesters' faith. They were among the very first handful of Quakers in the world. They believed in the inner light, the sanctity and worth of individual worship. How could they have held, bought, and sold human beings as slaves? The answer is very simple. For nearly a century after Quaker founder George Fox received his first fiery vision from the Lord, the Friends, like everyone else who could do so, held slaves, dealt in slaves. In 1758, the Philadelphia meeting was the first to outlaw slavery among its own members. By then, the Sylvesters were no longer Quakers, but they were still slaveholders. And they remained so until 1820, when London was his name, London, the last person they held in perpetual bondage, was manumitted. Slavery ended in